I honestly wish so badly that like some phase of graduate school would have involved like a deep historic analysis, at least of like your discipline, just to see how these basic ideas came about. It's been, I'm still piecing these things together, even from my own discipline, like really the history of how the foundational elements were established in the first place. And
So you're absolutely spot on, because in geology there there has always been this kind of dichotomy between catastrophism, so like events causing big changes, versus uniformitarianism. So what you see today is the processes that you can see through Earth's past. And for a long time, uniformitarianism has been the way to go, because that's something that seems to accord with the scientific method. In other words, it's something that you can visualize today, it's something that you can visualize and consider to have happened in the past. The the difficulty of uniformitarianism when you get to early Earth is that early Earth was a very different planet. You know, a large number of processes that we see on the current planet probably didn't happen, and it's pretty much a fact that every part of our planetary surface had been hit by something something from outside the planet. I mean, that's how I think most people would be quite happy that our planet solidified and came together in the first place. I like using this response when I get questions about oh, this is just wacky. Yeah, well, I say, like, go out in a nice cloudless night and look up at the moon and look at the craters on that. And just because you can't see as many craters on Earth doesn't mean it didn't suffer as many impacts. In fact, it'll have suffered proportionally more because it's got a much larger gravity well.
it's bigger. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how creators are kind of the go-to explanation for everything when it comes down to like these external interactions with like has anybody come out and come up with other ideas for how passing through the galactic arm might affect the crust or might affect orbits or have you gotten any of these emails or have you had a chance to present this at a conference yet? Have you actually like gone toe to toe with not yet? Okay.
We've been pretty much locked down here in Western Australia, so we're only kind of starting to open up now. Yeah, is what it is. It allowed me time to write the paper. Yeah, so pluses and minuses, but in terms of other processes, there has been other stuff in the literature where you think about having an effect on Earth's mantle and causing kind of tides within Earth's mantle because of gravitational interactions. Whether these are plausible or not probably could be nutted out with some calculations. Um,
But they're all essentially gravitational, so they have to do with the density of the different
yeah,
local star systems
yeah,
at the time. Yeah.
yeah. So one thing I would pick up on. So you mentioned that craters are the go-to mechanism of seeing extraterrestrial processes, and that's absolutely right. I mean, it's the most obvious manifestation of it. The thing is that our oldest crater is only about 2 billion years old. So going back and having an older record than that, we are probably left with things called spherical beds, which are when an impact comes in, hits the ground and kicks up a lot of material. That material turns into a melt glass and comes down as these fine little vaporized beads. So those beads then form certain parts of the stratigraphy. So that was the neat thing in our work, at least the model for the spiral arm passage. It it was spot on with some. Well, it was very close to some spherical beds as well. So we thought that's kind of neat and an extra piece of information.
Do you guys see this moon forming event? This Theia impact business?
So that's kind of
That's deep past.
that's the yeah that's basically before most of the, well, it's prior to any real record of the planet, right? Because that Theia collision basically vaporized the majority of the planet and then it resolidified. What I would say is really interesting is that lots of these different isotope systems, um, you can remember I was telling you about hafnium, for example, and that tells if stuff comes from the mantle or stuff comes from the crust. You can kind of recast that information back to a prediction of when the material came out of the mantle. And you do that, you can do it for hafnium, you can do it for neodymium. Um, that's a different isotope system. But they seem to point back to about 3.8 everywhere, with two exceptions, one exception being Jack Hills and the other exception being Acasta. And this is kind of interesting. And what I think is going on is at 3.8 is the end of the late heavy bombardment. So normal crust maybe started to really form at that time by more normal crust production processes. Whereas those two places I mentioned, Acasta and Jack Hills, which seem to have this legacy further back, that might be more a legacy of early large impacts on the planet. And indeed, people have talked about the formation of the rocks at Acasta, that's in Canada. These early rocks in Canada as being formed by impact-related processes.